Welcome to Not Suitable for Democracy, the show about what's good and not good for American democracy. I'm your host, Nick, and on today's episode, we're going to review the results of New York's Democratic primary, specifically Mamdani's 3 endorsed congressional candidates. Now, Mayor Mamdani has become a national figure in his own right, and he's using that political capital he's built to support 3 amazing candidates. In New York's 7th Congressional District, Claire Valdez; in New York's 10th Congressional District, Brad Lander; and in New York's 13th Congressional District, Darializa Avila Chevalier. And all 3 of them just won their Democratic primaries with great results. So, without further ado, let's jump into it. Real quick, I just want to say thank you. Thank you so much for tuning in and subscribing to this channel, where my goal is to make sure that you're informed and just aware of what's going on in your local democracy. And I'm super excited to share today's episode about New York City politics, so if you'd like to learn more, then make sure to subscribe to Not Suitable for Democracy on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Now, back to the show. So for those of you who are not in New York City, not registered voters, or just somewhere in the United States who just wants to know what's going on, well, here is just a brief highlight of what happened on Tuesday night. So on June 23rd, New York had its Democratic primary. Those are closed primaries, meaning that only registered Democrats can vote. So in the state of New York, there's nearly 6 million Democrats, I think 5.9 million to be exact. And what we found was that turnout was very low. Turnout is generally never really high in Democratic primaries. And when you think about it, with the way the world is, you've got so many people working overtime, long hours, 2 or 3 jobs. But even more so, people are spending time with their families. People are excited for the Knicks. People are excited for other things in their lives that are taking up the attention that we really need to bring back to focus on our local democracy. So, needless to say, turnout was low, but the ones who were able to pull out their voter base came out on top. Now, that night, Tuesday, June 23rd, was a big night for Mayor Mamdani and for progressives and Democratic Socialists. So Mayor Mamdani, who is the first Muslim mayor who is also a Democratic Socialist and progressive, and only at the age of 34, is leading the nation's wealthiest city, largest city in the country. So what made this night particularly special is that Mayor Mamdani endorsed 3 candidates for Congress. Now, being New York City's mayor, it's one thing to have a good grasp on the city you're running, but also local politics. But what makes this interesting is that this was Mamdani's first foray into national politics, specifically encouraging these 3 candidates to run and the voters to support these candidates to send them to Congress. Now, we know Mayor Mamdani has already had 2 meetings with President Trump in the Oval Office, which, some people love it, some people hate it. But if this means that Mayor Mamdani can deliver for New York, I'm all for it. So now this is actually Mamdani, showing his sign of strength and flexing that political muscle to show if he can get these folks to Congress. Now, as I mentioned before, even though turnout was low, we know that this was a Democratic primary, so only Democrats can vote. However, in each of these respective districts, between the 3 candidates that Mamdani endorsed, all of them have a majority of Democrats, meaning there is a very, 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 very likely chance that all of them will win in the November general election, when they will be up against a Republican, if not also independent or third-party voters or third-party candidates. So, at the end of the day, on June 23rd, we had 3 amazing victories. In New York's 7th Congressional District, we had Claire Valdez. In New York's 10th Congressional District, we had Brad Lander. And in New York's 13th Congressional District, we had Darializa Avila Chevalier. Now, so even though turnout was low with each of those elections, they each had a phenomenal election results. Claire Valdez, I'm going to need my notes for this. This district covered parts of South Queens, such as Sunnyside and Long Island City, meandering through the more western south part of Brooklyn. And that district is actually the most progressive district in the country. There's a lot of progressive politics that have come out of Brooklyn, and we've seen that over the past 20 years. But more importantly, this made so much sense where Claire's vision aligned with the political environment of the district. Now, even though Claire was a state assembly member prior to this, and she only was in office for 1 term, however, this was just enough of the experience she needed to really win over voters, on top of the long-standing history that she's had with organizing. And Claire has been there, and that was the organic slogan, Claire was there, that came out of this campaign because of all of the organizing work she's done over so many years, whether it was a protest, an organizing action, or even just being there with the votes in the state assembly. Claire Valdez showed through her actions a commitment to supporting the progressive policies that are supported by her constituents and now her future congressional constituents. So, really quickly now, Claire Valdez, she won her election with 56.1% of the vote. And in second place was Antonio Reynoso, who is the Brooklyn Borough president. He was a former city council member, and he has had long-standing roots as an organizer and as a Brooklyn native. As much as Antonio Reynoso did good work, earning the Working Families Party endorsement, earning the endorsement of Nydia Velázquez, who was originally elected for that seat for many, many years, she wanted to pass the torch to Antonio Reynoso. However, what happened was the electorate really knew that this was not the year for incumbents, and the fact that, Nydia wanted to make a challenge to Mayor Mamdani, where, Claire was endorsed by Mayor Mamdani, the New York City DSA, and, Velázquez really thought that this was a moment to really carry on more of the traditions that she had delivering for her district, as well as, the type of politics that Antonio would bring to the table, very similar to Nydia's. But it was not exactly what the electorate wanted. So Antonio came in second place with 35.8% of the vote. So 56.1 to 35.8. Claire crushed it. She won by 20 points, and that was 13,000 votes. So if you really think about it, like with all the organizing and all the fundraising and all of the, get out the vote efforts, right? Claire had a stronger campaign, and it really did speak to her organizing work that made a mark on everyone in that electorate, everyone in that district who really said, you know what, I'm going to show up for Claire because she was there when we needed her most. So congratulations to Claire Valdez, who is the Democratic nominee for New York's 7th Congressional District. Now moving a little further south in Brooklyn and to Lower Manhattan for New York's 10th Congressional District. Yes, this is the infamous New York 10 between two candidates, Brad Lander, who was the city comptroller and a former city council member, and was most recently a mayoral candidate who ran against Mayor Mamdani, who, remember, they cross-endorsed each other, right? So it made sense that Mayor Mamdani would now endorse Brad Lander for his race in Congress. And the incumbent, Dan Goldman. He had won 4 years ago, back in 2022, when multiple progressives like Yulene New and for Carlina Rivera, who were battling out for the top prize in that district. However, because progressives couldn't consolidate around one candidate, Dan Goldman was the strongest moderate candidate and was able to eke out a win just by, a few votes. It was actually a very close race. So this is a race that progressives have had their eye on for years. He wasn't challenged in 2024, but this was the year to do it. And that calculation proved correct. So Brad Lander, who is a progressive, he is liberal, he is Jewish, and though he does claim to be a Zionist, it is not a pejorative, because in this case, he made a concerted effort to reject corporate PAC money and lobbyist money from AIPAC. So what does that say about, Dan Goldman, the incumbent? Well, we know what happened on October 7th, 2023, and Dan Goldman was very much supportive of Israel and Prime Minister Netanyahu's efforts. Now, many of us don't agree with those government actions, and at the end of the day, that loyalty to Israel is what really hurt Dan Goldman, as opposed to his loyalty for delivering for his constituents. So, lo and behold, that proved the line of demarcation in this election. You have two Jewish liberal Democrats who are running for Congress. One is the incumbent, one is the challenger, and the key difference was their stance on Israel. So, when you look at the results, proof is in the pudding. Okay, so get this. I'm going to start with the incumbent's amount, all right? So the incumbent, Dan Goldman, came in second place with 28,445 votes. Now, that is about 5,000 more votes than Antonio Reynoso, okay? But Dan Goldman's 28,000 votes, that was about 34% of the electorate. So what does that mean for Brad Lander? Well, it basically means Brad Lander crushed it. He absolutely crushed the competition, okay? Huge congratulations to Brad Lander for earning 55,060 votes, which translated to 65.8% of the vote, meaning that Brad Lander's 65.8% of the vote compared to Dan Goldman's 34% of the vote is a whopping 30 points ahead. 30 points. The fact that this challenger, Brad Lander, took out the incumbent by 30 points. That is beyond embarrassing for any incumbent, that it is beyond humiliating for any incumbent, and the fact that it was all whittled down to the idea that someone put their loyalty in a foreign government sending our tax dollars to bomb children is just a good riddance to that type of politics, especially in New York's 10th congressional district. And let's face it, Brad Lander, he is a sweetheart, a good man. He even put his body on the line when it came down to protecting his immigrant neighbors against ICE. He got arrested in 26 Federal Plaza, and that made all the New York headlines, and that was such a hard moment for so many of us who really revere him and really see him as a good dad, a good husband, and he didn't deserve a treatment like that. But honestly, that is the type of commitment that our movement needed to see, especially seeing how, Dan Goldman, the incumbent, he didn't have any, actions against ICE. He didn't really do anything but offer some general platitudes. And that's not enough. We need leaders who are going to take this fight as far as it can go to really push back on not only poor policy, but on the Trump administration. And Brad Lander did that amazingly. So congratulations to Brad Lander for winning New York's 10th congressional district as the Democratic nominee. Now we move from Lower Manhattan to Upper Manhattan for the 13th congressional district, which covered neighborhoods such as Harlem, Washington Heights, and Kingsbridge. Now, in this congressional district, we had four candidates running. Now, believe it or not, we're going to focus on the top two because this is where the race really came about. Between Adriano Espaillat, who was the incumbent, who was the first undocumented immigrant to ever be elected to Congress. So while he does have an interesting record in terms of leaning toward the center-left, right, he has some, he likes to claim progressive credentials, but at the end of the day, Adriano Espaillat has not really proven himself to be a strong progressive leader. He endorsed Andrew Cuomo, the former governor, in the mayoral primary back in 2025. And then, of course, in the general election, he endorsed Mayor Mamdani. But it kind of showed his true colors off the bat, seeing how Adriano Espaillat was also a recipient of hundreds of thousands of dollars of corporate PAC money. Now, on top of that, we also saw a poor record with his stance on Israel. And what I mean by that is that not only was he accepting a lot of money from AIPAC, but he also refused constituent services. And as a member of Congress, you really shouldn't do that, let alone probably can't. But he did it because his allegiance wasn't to his community or constituents. It was to AIPAC. So similar to New York 10, we saw Adriano Espaillat pull the same moves. So specifically, Mahmoud Khalil, who had actually been, detained by ICE, right? They were willing to deport him and send him far, far away. And what happened was that Adriano Espaillat, his office was supposed to take care of that because it happened within his district, but he refused. And so, lo and behold, this allowed Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez to come to the rescue. Her office then took on this case, and if you recall, when Mahmoud Khalil was returned back to New York City, it was AOC who was with him on the airline tarmac. That's because she was the one who had to take on the case because Adriano Espaillat refused. So you see how it comes full circle, showing if this guy who claims to be a progressive won't even help his constituents, and AOC is helping a neighboring congressional district constituents, that really just shows the power of the progressive movement. That is, it shouldn't be determined by boundary lines or district lines, but determined by what is right and how we care for each other. And AOC proved that. So, lo and behold, who was Adriano Espaillat's challenger? Darializa Avila Chevalier. Now, she is a Democratic Socialist, a PhD student at Columbia University, and was the lead organizer for the encampments that, a lot of media press went all about. But here's the thing. Those organizing actions that Darializa did really not only galvanized the support on Columbia University's campuses, showing that we should not be sending our taxpayer dollars to what was happening in Gaza, but more importantly, it really did create this political fervor that really strengthened the movement. So Darializa has been an organizer for years, and during her time at Columbia, she's really put in the work, not only as a student who's focused on housing, but even as an organizer focused on calling out the genocide. Now, Darializa, so much respect for her because she had to overcome even more hurdles than Claire Valdez and Brad Lander, because as a strong Dominican woman who's also Muslim, she had to overcome racism. Now, I don't say racism as a whole, but there were so many race attacks that were thrown her way. Even up to the final days of the election, there were, constituents and supporters of Adriano Espaillat who were coming after Darializa and her volunteers, saying most gross, disgusting things, even coming to physically push them out of the way, and it got to be pretty nasty. So I was definitely concerned about, the final days, could she pull it off? Because when you see that kind of anger and hatred, you really never know what you could expect. But history prevailed, and Darializa's hard work came to fruition, because the final results for this four-way primary, Adriano Espaillat came in second place with 30,464 votes, and Darializa came out on top with 32,790 votes. So she won with a plurality of the votes with 49.4%. With the incumbent, Espaillat, he came in with 45.9%. So that's a 3.6% difference. And again, only 88% of the vote has been counted so far. There's still about, 11 to 12% more to be counted. But because of this margin, there is a very, very, very good chance that Darializa has it in the bag, and we won't have to worry about it, because when you look at the other candidates, there were two other folks who ran, and together, the third place candidate received 3.5%, which was 2,340 votes, and the fourth place person, I'm not even going to say his name because he's an infamous rabble-rouser who actually has personal beef against me, but that's another story for another day. So he only came in with 532 votes for a race that had, over 62,000 votes in it? So that's that on that. So that being said, sure, the vote difference between the bottom two candidates would have actually made the difference between the top two candidates, right? The numbers are there. But at the end of the day, Darializa's hard work and organizing, let alone with the support from the Democratic Socialists of America and Mayor Mamdani's endorsement, was enough to carry her across the finish line to now become the Democratic nominee for New York's 13th Congressional District. I wish her so much congratulations and the best of luck for what she's about to do in Congress, along with Claire Valdez, another DSA member, and strong progressive Brad Lander. I wish all of them the best of luck, and hey, now they can join New York's 14th Congressional District and the first Democratic Socialist elected to Congress for the state of New York in modern history, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. So now we are sending 4 strong progressives, 3 Democratic Socialists to the United States House of Representatives. They're going to win their races in November, so I have no problem saying that now. But make sure you go out and vote in the November general election on November 3rd, 2026 to send them to Congress. So reviewing the 3 candidates, Claire Valdez, Brad Lander, and Darializa Avila Chevalier, we know that their organizing actions really made the mark in terms of turning voters out to the polls. Now, across all 3, yes, they were all endorsed by Mayor Mamdani, whose, national profile really lifted them, above the waters to really make sure, A, they were getting press visibility, B, voters were aware of who to even be supporting and why, and then 3, the fact that with the content creation that each candidate was able to produce, right? Not only do they have their own ads all referencing Mamdani's endorsement, but even Mayor Mamdani had a few good ads, such as the Knicks ad calling them all the Dream Team. And if you saw the ad, you'd see Claire, Brad, and Darializa all with the orange basketball, passing it to each other and all posing, kind of like on a basketball court. And that just that was so ingenious, seeing that the primary election coincided with the NBA Finals, and the New York Knicks were in the actual finals, which they haven't done since 1999. So this genius strategy was able to tap into two key components. The first, Mayor Mamdani's love for New York City. We know that Mayor Mamdani lives and breathes this as a New Yorker, and while he wasn't necessarily born here, he did move here at such a young age that allowed him to grow up within the culture and really understand what it means to be a New Yorker. Two, sports. We know that sports is a great way to bring people into the fold. It makes politics more accessible, and it taps into the fervor of the media headlines that were already being cultivated by the New York press. The Knicks being a New York team, but obviously making national headlines, Mamdani tapped into that fervor that was created within the culture of New York City. And that did help some people become aware of these candidates. Now, I'm not saying that's the only reason, but for some people who are sitting on the sidelines, pun intended, that was enough to bring some of them to the polls. Now, on top of that, what we're seeing after the election, they all won by great margins. You had, Claire Valdez up by 20 points, Brad Lander up by 30 points, and then even Darializa won her election by just under 4 points. Now, all three in their own right ran strong campaigns. But what were the common denominator? Well, number one, all three rejected corporate PAC money. So the fact that they were running grassroots campaigns, really looking for, really trying to show their potential voters that they would be committed to not siding with big business and the policies that harm the working class voters and people of New York. Number two, they were all against the genocide that's happening in Gaza. I mean, Brad Lander was the clearest example of having someone who could be Jewish, but also criticize the Israel government. And he did that flawlessly. And just the idea that obviously Claire Valdez and Darializa also have similar values, they also took on those same tenets of their platform. And then even if you look at abolishing ICE, I think when you look at abolishing ICE, all three of them are vociferously against Trump's administration and his policies around ICE. And I believe Claire Valdez and I believe Brad Lander, I think they both got arrested for protesting ICE. Now, all three of them could make the case for having, stronger immigration policies in terms of, an open pathway to citizenship while also keeping our borders safe. Now, we will have to see how they, present that to the rest of the Democratic caucus, where some Democrats voted in favor of the Lake and Riley Act, right? So we'd have to see how that will play out once they do get to Congress. But what we do know is that they will not waver when it comes to protecting our immigrant neighbors, especially here in New York. And then lastly, the through line between all three of them, the two candidates, Brad Lander and Darializa, they both took out incumbents. This is important because this comes at a time when all across the country, progressives are winning their races because they are taking out the incumbents that were in charge. Because what are we seeing? Since 2024, President Trump, when he was inaugurated in 2025, he has been wreaking havoc on a lot of the policies and programs that we are used to serving the American people. And because of that, right, we're seeing the ramifications. People are afraid to immigrate to the United States, meaning that we lose potential talent and workers who are looking to, fuel the United States economy. Even if it means migrant workers, we need people to harvest our food, but also take care of our agriculture, especially when it comes to feeding millions of families around the country. So seeing Trump's policies wreak so much destruction, ripping families apart, we know that the way we fight back is through, supporting these kind of candidates, but also challenging the incumbents. Because what if they have to say for it, right? Letting this happen, not even really sticking their necks out to really be bold and say enough is enough. Most, Democratic elected officials in this country, they don't do enough. They do the bare minimum to play it safe, whether it's accepting money from corporate PACs to keep their seat so they don't rock the boat because businesses don't like a volatile economy. And then they also want to keep it safe because, they just want to keep quiet and slide into the next election. But finally, these three candidates finally said enough is enough. and the voters were right behind them. If you look at this from Gothamist, now Gothamist is a New York City publication that takes on the news, especially in politics, and they show right here through all these races, including New York 12, what age the voters came out to vote. Now, again, turnout was low for this election, but what we are seeing a lot of young people turn out, especially in New York 7. So you can see the young folks are the ones that most likely, gave Claire her victory, especially by such a high 20-point margin. And you'll see in some of the other races, right? Older voters had come out to really support those candidates. And when you think about it, right? Think about what these candidates stood for, what areas of the city they were running in, and you start to really get the picture that, young voters really spread out across the city. The average age of the New Yorker is 35 years old, and our mayor is 34 years old, so it does align with what we expect to see in terms of our population and leadership. And same with Darializa and Claire. They're also millennials, and they're also very much in tune to what our generation wants. Now, Brad Lander, while he's not a millennial, he is a very strong voice for progressive politics. And he has a long record in New York City politics that has earned him the credibility and the trust from progressive voters, who generally skew younger. So it's no surprise to see that Lander was able to build a coalition of younger voters and older voters, especially when trying to, really take out an incumbent who just wasn't serving his district very well. So seeing how this new wave of generational change, taking on the incumbent, but fighting for policies that are truly going to deliver for the people. That is the through line that really made the mark on this year's Democratic primaries. And those three things were enough on top of these progressive platforms, or it really drove voters to the polls. It was low turnout, but the voters that showed up were progressive voters ready for change. So I am super excited to be a part of this wave of change, considering, I'm an active voter, out organizing, volunteering. We do the work because not only we're excited to see this change happen, but when we build community and watch our movement grow, it just makes me so grateful to see that all the hard work goes towards something. And it makes these moments even more special, especially when doing it for years and years. I've been organizing in New York City for 10 years now, and I think it's safe to say that after, watching DSA, voting for AOC in 2018, sending her to Congress, 8 years ago, and now we're seeing more and more members of DSA, progressive voters. Now we're sending 3 Democratic Socialists to Congress, AOC, Darializa, and Claire. All 3 of them are going to make us so proud. And pulling Brad Lander into the group, because let's face it, even though Brad Lander is not a Democratic Socialist, he basically ran as one. And the best part, he is such a mensch and someone who will really make all of us proud, fighting the good fight and always keeping it classy. I am so excited to see the New York congressional delegation not only grow and become more progressive, but also super excited to see how they are going to fight back in Congress and deliver for New Yorkers. And that's our show. Thank you so much for tuning in for this episode of Not Suitable for Democracy. But you know what is suitable for democracy is voting in our midterm general elections. And that's coming up on November 3rd, 2026. So we have a few months to prepare. So this gives you time to, number 1, register to vote if you haven't already. 2, check your voter registration is up to date. If you're registered as a Democrat, Republican, Independent, or something else, that's okay. Everyone can vote who is registered is able to do so in the midterm elections, again, on November 3rd. And then lastly, if you're moving or had a change of address, make sure to get that updated. Let's say try to do it by October. That way you don't have to run into any issues with the voter deadlines, and that way you'll be able to participate in our democracy come November 3rd. So if you want to stay updated for more news and updates, make sure to subscribe to Not Suitable for Democracy on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Or follow along on Instagram and TikTok. I use the same handle for both channels, so you can follow along at NSFD_pod. Thank you so much to everyone who tuned in to today's episode, but also Thank you to everyone who voted in this year's Democratic primary right here in New York. I know our democracy is what makes our country stronger, so the more people we get involved, the more people have a seat at the table and make their voice heard. And if you didn't, that's okay, because there's always next time. And remember, democracy is not suitable without you.